A few weeks ago, I asked Congressman James Clyburn, the third-ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives, where in the Constitution is the federal government authorized to regulate health care? He replied by telling me essentially that members of Congress really don't care about the Constitution. They write the laws they think will get them reelected, and then they let the courts worry about whether or not the new laws are constitutional. Of course, when the justices of the Supreme Court, who take their oaths to uphold the Constitution far more seriously than do members of Congress, invalidate legislation that exceeds Congress's powers, you can hear the howls of complaints all the way from Hoboken to Malibu. And the big government types in both parties and in academia seem to forget that frequently conservative and libertarian justices have saved us from the tyranny of the majority. Joining me now to talk about all this is Seth Lipsky, author of the great new book, The Citizen's Constitution. Seth is not only a good friend, he's also a former member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board and the publisher of the late, great New York Sun. Seth, welcome to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge. I'm happy to be here.
Are you and I, or people like you and I, the only ones who really care about the Constitution and whether the government stays within the confines of it?
You know, it's a good question, and it's interesting to me that just before this segment began, you were talking about Congressman Ron Paul, whom I've been covering since on and off since 1981 when he was on the United States Gold Commission. And he's a very unusual congressman, not the only one, but unusual in that he thinks constitutionally. When he thinks about money, he's thinking about those enumerated powers, which are the only powers that the United States Congress has.
When I had the debate with, or it was an interview, it became a debate with Congressman Clyburn, and he basically said to me, Judge, most of what we do down here, meaning in Washington, is not justified by the Constitution. He then said, can you tell me where health care is prohibited to the federal government in the Constitution? They have a mindset, right, and it's in both parties. I'm not just picking on the Democrats. Correct. They have a mindset that the Congress is a general legislature. It can right any wrong, tax any activity, regulate any human behavior, so long as there's no express prohibition of that in the Constitution.
You know, I think, Judge, actually the point you raise is one of the most important issues in America right now. And there is a bill in Congress called the Enumerated Powers Act, right, which would require the Congress to attach to every piece of legislation it passes or resolution a statement of where in the Constitution it's getting the authority to pass this law.
Do you think they'll ever vote on such a piece of legislation?
I mean, it's a self-restricting piece of legislation.
I mean, they won't even vote on legislation that requires them to read what they vote for. They're certainly not going to vote for legislation that requires them to find justification in the Constitution, even though they all took the same oath to uphold it.
Right. It's a very good question. I mean, you know, I once said, I think George Will, you know, that Congress would be shamed into something, and he said, shame.
Yeah, Congress has no shame. Congress has no shame.
It's a good issue.
I want to hold up the book because I want everybody to see it. It's called The Citizen's Constitution by Seth Lipsky. Now, I have written about the Constitution, and I wrote a book similar to this in which I went through the Constitution called The Constitution in Exile. I must tell you, this annotated guide is superb. It is easy to read and easy to follow, and it's filled with fascinating tidbits of how words and meanings and phrases and powers and ideas and values got into the Constitution.
Well, thank you very much, Judge. I appreciate that, particularly coming from you. This book is not by a lawyer. I am not a lawyer.
Well, that's the value of it, because the layperson can understand it. Does anybody explain anything better than a newspaper man who's got a limited amount of time and space?
Right. Well, about a third of this book is history, and about a third of it is case law and the decisions of the great courts, and about a third is current events. And it is designed to make the Constitution accessible to a basic American who's an intelligent person, and this document, the Constitution, is really there to protect his or her rights.
Is there anything in the Constitution that authorizes the federal government to regulate health care?
You know, I think that's a very, I'd say they might try it under interstate commerce, but I'd say it's difficult. I call myself a member of the plain language school of the law.
I wish the members of Congress agreed with you. The book is The Citizen's Constitution by Seth Lipsky. Seth, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Judge.